Leslie with the Moxxi Women's Foundation, and today I'm speaking with Haley Shapley, and she's the author of the book Strong Like Her, which you can see right behind her. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you taking the time. So how did you come to be the author of this book?
Great question. I started strength training about probably 6 or 7 years ago now. It's funny, I've been telling the story for a few years, so the time changes. But before that, I grew up playing a lot of sports and was always kind of active and athletic, but I had never really strength trained with any intention. And as I started to get into it, I noticed that more women were lifting heavy weights. I was seeing people in my own life as well as on social media, on TV shows like American Ninja Warrior, and I just started to wonder when that transition happened. Because when I grew up, it was all about Jane Fonda and step aerobics and leotards and getting slimmer. And through the 90s, you know, the kind of the cultural norms were very much to be tiny, you know, to really be small. Yeah, to take up less space. The models of the time were all really small. And it seemed like that was changing. And so I started to read about the history of fitness because I was really curious whether muscularity on women was something that had changed over time. Maybe there were time periods where it was more socially acceptable or more common for women to have a lot of muscle. Or whether it had been kind of a linear progression and we're at the apex of it now. But when I started to read about the history of fitness, I did not discover very much about women, especially women who were purposely trying to get stronger. So I really saw an opening here to uncover the stories of the women who have been pushing their athletic potential and really getting strong on purpose. And shining a spotlight on their stories for a popular audience.
That's awesome. You know, I did an interview with a woman who is a women's health coach, and she was doing fitness training, and she realized that, you know, there wasn't a lot of information out there even about strength training specifically for women, that most programs were geared towards a man's physique.
Right.
And that.
Yeah, so... Sorry.
No, just that.
Yeah, I think so much of research in exercise has been done on men. We see this in all kinds of areas. Just medical research in general has typically been done on men, but particularly for fitness. And there are differences in the way that men and women respond to certain fitness regimens. And I think... Sorry, I forgot another point that you had made that I wanted to respond to. But yeah, there's just not a lot of information out there for women who want to get started. And I think that we're getting more of that now. And in the book, I talk about Muscle Beach in the 1930s, which is where physical culture in the U.S. was really developed. And back then, Pudgy Stockton, who ended up being the queen of Muscle Beach, she kind of started in the same way where she really wanted to strength train, but there were no resources out there. She went to the library and there was just absolutely nothing about what women could do at the time. So she kind of started that as a niche and ended up writing a column in Strength and Health magazine for a decade that specifically talked to women and let them know, you know, what they needed to know about strength training. But it's been kind of a hole in the fitness industry for a long time that I think is now starting to get covered a little bit more.
So what kind of information can someone expect to find in your book?
Yeah, so this is really a cultural history. It looks at women and muscular strength all the way back in ancient Greece and through today. It's makes some really interesting stops along the way, like on the pedestrian tracks of the 1870s, the circus rings of the early 1900s, the Olympics in the 1930s, the weight rooms of the 1970s, and then I look at, you know, the soccer fields and the tracks of today. And along the way, you'll meet women who represent different movements that were happening, who all sort of embody strength in a different way. And you'll see how physical strength ties into other types of strength, because I think for so long we've thought of it as just its own thing, but it really is tied in with emotional strength, social health, all kinds of dimensions of well-being that go far beyond just, how much you can pick up.
Very good. Circling back to the Olympics, you recently wrote an article about Women Olympics and the play-by-plays and the voice.
Yeah. So I'm a huge Olympics fan, and I watch many hours of them every time they come around. And when I was watching these most recent Olympics in Beijing, as well as the ones that happened in the summer in Tokyo, I noticed that there were not very many women commentating. And this is in the US on NBC. And I actually found that for these past Olympics, there were no women in the play-by-play announcer role. And so they are doing a better job with getting analysts in the, female analysts to break down what's happening. So the analysts are typically former athletes or current athletes, but people who performed this sport on a high level. Whereas the play-by-play announcer is typically a journalist who covers a lot of different things. And so I think that we need more women in sports journalism, because they're the ones who are kind of shaping the narrative that the audience gets. And when you have women telling the story, in addition to men, you just get a different perspective and a more holistic understanding of what's going on. So I would love to see more women in journalism who are covering different athletic disciplines.
Yeah, a little more her story, a little less his story.
Exactly. And I have some examples in the article of just, things that male commentators, play-by-play announcers have said while watching women's sports that are just not accurate. And, when you have an opportunity to tell your own story or to relate to a story a little bit more, I think those inaccuracies are less likely to happen.
Yeah, and I think that, there's a big push to just make things a little bit more, not even, but just, women in sports are starting to get more recognition of not getting the same money, prizes, coverage as men. It was this year, I believe, that the U.S. women's soccer team, didn't they just make?
Yeah, that just happened very recently, where they had the settlement to finally get some equal pay.
Yeah, it's amazing. I personally am not, I don't do a ton with sports. I was all art, but my husband reads every single ESPN article that comes out every single day, and he always likes to fill me in on the stuff that's happening with women in sports, so I think it's fascinating. I also had an opportunity to interview Georgia Gould not too long ago, and she was responsible for the Gould method, which gave, I want to say it was the Olympic mountain bike women equal prize money. So there's definitely a lot happening, and the more that we can bring attention to it, I think the faster it can go. How long did it take you to write the book?
I had about 9 months to write the book, so it was pretty fast, actually, in terms of book writing goes. I think, at least. I did kind of have the idea for quite a while beforehand, and it was kind of stewing in my brain. But in terms of writing, I wrote it over about 9 months, and then spent a couple of months in revisions editing it.
Wow, that is really fast. That's I can't even imagine. It takes me.
It was a lot of bleary nights, and I'd wake up and just I couldn't talk, sort of like now. No, but it was definitely worth it. I loved getting to take a deep dive into a topic. Before this, I have been a freelance journalist for my entire career, a writer or an editor, and I've mostly focused on shorter pieces. So I've never had the chance to write something of this depth, and I just really enjoyed getting lost in all of the research and the reading that was related to it, because it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I should also mention that I'm not So I do love sports. I mentioned I love the Olympics, but it's really a book about fitness and like women's history and things that were happening culturally. So you definitely don't have to be someone who watches basketball or softball or soccer to enjoy it. Because it's sort of about how fitness touches all of our lives, even if we're not elite athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that there's anybody that hasn't, attempted some type of fitness lifestyle at one point in time. So I think it's very interesting to see the women's perception throughout history. Very curious.
Yeah, definitely. I know when I was growing up and taking history classes in school, I was always most interested in those sections of the book that were talking about what was actually going on in everyday people's lives, aka what was going on in women's lives, because otherwise you were just reading about what was happening, with wars and politically, and women, unfortunately, were not involved, and for so many eras of history, for a lot of that, and so I really clung to those cultural history aspects, and so I enjoyed getting a chance to pull out some of those tidbits that you probably didn't get a chance to read when you were in school.
What do you typically write about? You said you're a freelance journalist.
Yeah, so I have written about a lot of different things. I was a travel writer for a long time, and I've always written about health and fitness, and that's probably what I write about most now. But I did spend several years traveling all over, and that was a great experience and has informed my writing and perspective a lot.
I can imagine. So if someone were to want to purchase your book, where is it being sold?
It's available wherever books are sold. You can find it online or from a bookseller near you. If it's not available, you can always ask someone to order it. So I always recommend people support indie bookstores if you can, but it's also super convenient to order online.
Yeah, indie bookstores. It's shop small.
Shop small, and also available via audiobook if you enjoy listening while you're working out. That's my favorite way right now, probably, to get through books is in between sets when I'm at the gym. So it's also available in that format.
Great. How long ago was it published?
It was published in 2020, right when the pandemic hit. So we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of it, and it wasn't the best time for it to debut, but luckily it's a timeless message, I think. So still relevant.
Absolutely, it'll be relevant forever. It'll just need to be updated at some point.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, so in the final chapter, I talk about some of the current day things going on that you had mentioned earlier, like sponsorships and TV coverage and that type of thing. And so the U.S. soccer settlement is an update to it that I'm happy has changed. But not much else has changed other than that since the book was published.
Yeah, we had an opportunity to speak with Brittany Diamond, who is World's Strongest Woman, and she was another one that was saying that World's Strongest Man prize money was like more than double World's Strongest Woman, and it's just,
Yeah, there's a lot of disparity in what men and women are paid, and there are a lot of arguments about why that is. I think people like to point to the idea that men generate more revenue, so they should be paid more. But I think with U.S. soccer, we see that actually the women are generating more revenue now. And that is why they were eventually able to win, because they were able to prove that.
I mean, let's be honest. If you don't have exposure to something, if something's not being presented, it's not ever going to get revenue. If you don't know that it's happening.
Exactly. It is totally about exposure and about investments. If you don't invest in something, you can't expect people to find it. And, if you look at something like basketball, men have been playing professionally for 50 years, longer than women have been playing professionally. So that's a big head start that they got. And women weren't even able to play a regular 5-on-5 game until the 1970s. Whereas men have been playing a 5-on-5 game since the 1890s when basketball was invented. So it's not like the playing field has been equal for so many of these sports. But if you look at something like CrossFit, which was founded in the 2000s, that has had equal prize money for the men and the women participating since it started. And so nobody thinks that that is strange or that women should get paid less, because the norm has been from the outset that everyone got paid the same amount. They get the same amount of airtime, they do the same workouts. It's just, that's the expectation from the beginning, and everyone accepts that. So I think, if all sports had started off that way, we wouldn't have this disparity in talent, in exposure, and all of that we see today.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that we continue to make progress every day and, just keep rattling chains and...
I think we're headed in the right direction. And, the women I profile from all different eras have really lifted us on their shoulders, as it were, to be able to kind of continue to make this progress.
Yeah, and it's really, really important that we recognize those women, in my opinion, so I'm very glad that somebody, took the time to dive back into history to give them, some thank you. Thank you for making room for us.
Absolutely. They deserve their due, and I'm glad that I was able to play a part in that.
That's great. Do you get any pushback on your book, as far as, because there is still a big perception about women not, being strong and lifting weights and all of that.
Yeah, I think I have not gotten a lot of pushback on the book, which is great. People have responded well to it. I think in an area where there is still pushback is in how strong someone gets, how strong a woman gets, and how much that changes her physique. So I was training for a bodybuilding show when I got the idea to write Strong Like Her. And as I started to train, people said things to me like, don't get too big, don't change your appearance in a way that would be unpleasing, and they ask things like, what will men think of you? Or alternately, like, men will really like you now. And so we have this sort of weird idea that we have to contextualize women's hobbies in relation to how men will perceive them, which we don't tend to do in reverse. And so I think that women who put on a lot of muscle and who get really strong still do get some comments from people who don't understand why they would be choosing to do that.
Did you at any point put on a lot of muscle and change your physical appearance?
I wouldn't say I put on a lot of muscle. I did change my physical appearance, and I was working out a lot. I was lifting a lot, but I was competing in the bikini division, which is sort of the lowest level of muscularity that is in bodybuilding. It's still more muscle than than the average person would be carrying around. But I guess, and I did have someone in my family tell me that I looked like a man while I was training. But in general, I didn't get a ton of negative commentary, and I think a lot of that is just due to our evolving ideas of what a woman's body can look like. I do think we have a slightly broader idea of what that can be now, thanks to women who are in the spotlight and thanks to sports that prioritize muscularity in order to be successful. We've seen just a huge increase in the past 10 years in powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, CrossFit, strong woman competitions. So I think that people are a little bit more used to seeing different physiques now.
In your day-to-day life, I'm curious now, going through, did you feel like people, strangers going through your day reacted to you differently when you had, that a different physique than, maybe a more less muscular? Because I know that before I had dreadlocks and I just had normal hair, people treated me differently. So I'm curious as to what that would be like.
That's a good question. I think in my day-to-day life, I think when you're wearing like regular clothes, you can't really tell. And I would hear that from people even who were very strong. Like I interviewed a woman who was a competitive bodybuilder in the 1980s, and she still does bodybuilding shows today. She organizes them today. But she had like 16-inch biceps, which is huge. But people didn't really know until she flexed. And then they were like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? Because otherwise they just thought she was this, you know, cute leotard wearing young woman. And then she was like, no, I'm actually really, really strong. Watch me flex. And then people's opinions changed for her, and they would be like, ew, gross. Like, why are you doing this?
You know, I love the videos that you see on TikTok where, you know, you have a woman walk up to, you know, deadlift, and I couldn't even begin to tell you how many pounds, big round things, and the reactions of the people around her when she does it. And I saw one actually earlier today that I absolutely loved. It was this very small, slender woman who was wearing a tank top where the back was all open and just had these little teeny tiny strings, pair of jeans, super cute, and she turned and she flexed, and you just saw everybody around her jaw drop, because it was exactly what you were saying. She just looked like a very slight, dainty little thing, and then a beast. It was amazing.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it sort of depends on what happens to your physique. Everyone's a little bit different too, and it depends on what sport you're training for and all of that. But I will say, when I would tell people I was training, like I had people ask if they could touch my muscles, you know, ask if they could touch my biceps, which is not something I was used to having happen before that. So it sort of feels like when you make a decision to alter your body in a way that is outside the norm, that it then feels like a communal thing where people can comment or be part of it. Like I know that women who are pregnant, you know, will get people touching their bellies, and maybe people who have a hair texture that's outside the norm will have people asking to touch their hair. And so I think it's similar with, you know, putting on muscle, where suddenly people feel like, oh, you've invited me in to comment on you, which is not necessarily an invitation for others.
No, we still have some work to do on that as well. But every day we'll make a little bit more progress, because, you know, there's also more people that are speaking up about that, you know, exactly what you're saying. This is not an invitation, you know, my clothing does not mean that I want it. My muscles do not mean you can touch it. My hair does not mean you can touch it. So just more things.
I feel like we're making a lot of progress, but then I was standing at the bus stop the other day, and a man came up to me and started making inappropriate commentary that he justified by the shape of my thighs. And it's like, the shape of my thighs is not an invitation for anything, you know? It doesn't mean anything. And yet he felt like that was justification for what he was saying. So it is one step forward, sometimes two steps back, but I do think that we are progressing in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, like we said, the women's soccer team was a huge win, and there's just more to come. You know, you're seeing more, you know, athletic directors and female coaches and things like that. So it's amazing. Well, in like, you know, professional sports and, you know, and like NFL, and I've been trying to get a female coach for the NFL, but, you know, I'm not there yet. One day.
They're busy.
Yeah, they're very busy.
I think, yes, and I think that getting people in those types of positions as trainers, as coaches in the head office, all of that, it's huge just to have diversity in those roles, diversity of all kinds in those roles. And it's something that's needed. And, you know, you don't have to have played football at a high level to coach football, to work on the business aspects of football. You know, all these arguments that we see made about why women don't belong in those kinds of roles, but there are plenty of men who are very successful in coaching and other roles who were never high performers in that particular sport, because it's not a prerequisite for being good at a job other than being a player.
Yeah. Well, it's that old adage, those who can't do, teach.
And often you are good at teaching or coaching something if you weren't that good at it. Because if you were really just always super good at something, it can be very hard to explain to others how to be that excellent as well. So sometimes it works. There are great players who turn into great coaches, but oftentimes it's not someone who was an all-star who is really successful on the sidelines.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out tonight. I really appreciate it. We're going to make sure to have links to your book. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy and learn a little bit more about women, and because it's important and we need to make more strides. And if we don't know where we were, we don't know where to go.
Great point, absolutely. And there are also beautiful portraits, I should mention, in the book from celebrity photographer Sophie Holland of 23 modern-day athletes from all different athletic disciplines, body types, and backgrounds. So it's a great addition to the book as well.
Oh, it's amazing. I can't wait to see it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Let us know if there's a part 2 or an updated version of this as we make more progress, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon. Bye.